Hello and welcome to the Empowered Expat Wife podcast. If you moved abroad following your significant other and are looking to create a fulfilled life on your terms there, this is the place to be. I'm your host Camilla Quintana and I'm so excited to be on this journey with you and to inspire you to create the kind of life abroad you truly deserve. Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 30 of the Empowered Expat Wife podcast. Wow, 30 episodes. That's something, right? We've come a long way. And I'm so happy about this. I'm having so much fun recording this show, getting together with, like-minded people in the expat field, sharing my approaches with you. It's really become such a source of joy for me, and I hope it is for you too. So just as a reminder, in case you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the show. Leave a review, especially on Apple iTunes. You can give a star rating. You can leave a short, summary of what others can expect, because this will really help us to spread the word and get more expat women, expat wives to find this podcast and get their weekly dose of inspiration and support. And today I have something very fun planned. We're going to talk about what we'd like folks back home to know about our life abroad. Because there are often so many misconceptions, and it makes us feel more separated to our friends and our family members back home when we feel like they're not really getting it. They're not really getting what our life is like. They're not making the effort sometimes to really understand. And obviously, sometimes it's also really hard because our life is so different. As expats, we struggle so much with loneliness and isolation. I mean, especially during COVID, we all do, right? But as expats, even more. And so feeling separated from our loved ones back home, granted that you have this home base and like your childhood friends there and your family members there, makes us feel even more lonely and even more out of place, which is such a shame. So this episode is really something that maybe helps you to put some things that you're feeling and sensing into words. Also something that you could share with your loved ones back home. Feel free to share this episode with them so that they can get a better understanding for what our life abroad is really like. And also, it's not just going to be me talking here. I've invited numerous women to contribute to this episode with their thoughts and their experiences. And if you're wondering, hey, how come I wasn't asked? Well, that's probably because you're not on my list. So if that is the case, make sure to sign up. The best way to do that is to head over to my website, camillaquintana.com, go to my free resources section where you'll find several free downloadable guides that will be really helpful for your life abroad. They're specifically tailored to expat wives and expat women. You have my signature freebie, which is the 10-minute nurture boost, where you get a video, an audio, and a workbook, which I promise you will make you feel more connected, nourished, inspired, and ready to take on the challenges of your daily life in those 10 minutes. Then there's the Feel Better Toolkit, which is a really extensive resource. It's, I think, plus 10 pages of a fillable workbook where you can do great exercises. And there's also the Multicultural Couples Checklist, also a fillable PDF. So make sure to get any of those or all of those. They are up for grabs and they're specifically made for you. And then your email address will go to my list, and every week or every 2 weeks sometimes, I send out special insights about expat living, special tips and tricks and tools, and also special offers that the women on my list will definitely always get first, and sometimes only they will get it. So you don't want to miss out on that. All right, so with no further ado, let me jump into this episode and let's talk about what we'd like people back home to know about our life abroad. Number one, just because we may post beautiful pictures doesn't mean everything is always great. This happens a lot, especially when you live in a place that's deemed exotic and beautiful by the people back home. And it reminds me of a recent podcast episode that I did with Lara, aka From Iceland with Love. It was a German bonus episode. So, in case you don't speak German, just in a nutshell, we talked about how for her, starting her Instagram blog was actually a sort of self therapy. You know, being forced to go out to look for beauty in this foreign land where, you know, she felt really lost in the beginning, and then share this beauty with others, it can literally be a lifesaver, and it's also a thing to do. So it's actually really healthy. So to the people back home, when you see us posting beautiful pictures on social media, or we send them to you in our, you know, WhatsApp chats and so forth, don't assume we don't have any problems. In this sense, a picture does not speak a million words, like the saying goes, right? It's just a picture. It's just one aspect of our life. Sophie, an expat in Austria, says, "My mom always tells me that I have such a lovely family and such a beautiful house, and I really should not complain. While that's true, it doesn't mean that life abroad is always easy and that I have no problems." And Naveen, an expat in Dubai, says, "People think that my life here is very glamorous. That's a typical misconception which leads to various other issues, like feeling guilty about complaining." Yeah. Feeling guilty, I think I'm going to do a whole episode on that, because a lot of expats are, you know, pushed to feel guilty for the life they have and yet still struggling, obviously, you know, with the many difficulties that come along with this lifestyle. But if you have to feel guilty for your life, or for what seems to be your life, and if you feel like you need to hide certain aspects of your life, that's a huge red flag for any friendship and any relationship. You know, if we cannot be authentic, we are very likely to grow apart. And that's exactly what we want to avoid, and why we are recording this episode. All right, so number 2, the second thing we'd like people back home to know is that our life abroad is not a holiday. Just because someone gets to live an adventure in a different country, or doesn't work, or gets to travel a lot, you know, pre and post COVID, hopefully, that does not mean that they're on a vacation. We still struggle with day-to-day things. We have to cook, we have to clean, buy groceries, do paperwork, deal with day-to-day challenges. Plus, we're doing it in a different language, in a different culture, a different system, and with many obstacles on our way. Trust us. Leonie, an expat in Mexico, says, "People often tell me they envy me for living in Mexico because when they came here on a holiday, they thought it was so great. Sure, it's a beautiful country, but don't compare your 2-week holiday with my 2 years of day-to-day hassles." And Andrea, an expat in the Bahamas, says, "People think I'm living a very exotic and privileged life here and just sitting by the beach and having the privilege of not doing anything the whole day." Well, that's clearly not an accurate description of expat life. All right, number 3, don't forget about us. Life abroad gets lonely. Sometimes people back home may forget about the loneliness expats often experience abroad. You may check in with us in the first months of moving, but then life often gets in the way, and we get it. We all know that life gets hectic. You may have heard us talk about a few friends we've made, or, you know, in our first conversations with you, we may seem to be doing really well. You may assume that we're all set, and you may even assume that we're changed, that we're one of them now, and that we don't need you anymore. But that's not the case. What you should know is that in the beginning, expats can often be very enthusiastic and alert, really taken in everything. The reality that we're here to stay has not kicked in yet, and we probably haven't encountered many obstacles yet. So please check back in with us after a few months and even after a few years and ask us how we're doing. Life abroad does get lonely, sometimes because we literally don't have close friends, or not yet. Other times because it's so obvious that we're different. You know, we look different, we speak differently, We're used to doing things differently, and that can make us feel like the eternal odd one out. I have a good friend who I'm so thankful for simply calling me up much more than I do, actually, and even when I don't. And she'll just tell me some daily random things that are happening in her life just as she would if I were there with her. One time she even sent me a little gift out of the blue just because she thought of me. And I'm so grateful for that because it really makes me feel like our friendship can stand the test of time and the distance in between. Ella, an expat in the US, says, I'd like my loved ones to know that when I don't call or write as much, it's not because I don't care. It's because I don't want to burden them with my sadness and loneliness that I often feel abroad. This is a phenomenon I encounter a lot, and there are so many layers to this. Sometimes we don't feel like we're allowed to complain in the eyes of others, or sometimes we think that they wouldn't understand what we're going through anyway. The result is then that we hold back from contacting and talking openly with our loved ones back home, and that adds to that sense of loneliness. And that's actually exactly why I created the 10-minute nurture boost that I told you about before that you can get in my free resources section, because I believe there is no expat who does not know the feeling of loneliness abroad. All right, so number 4 is take an interest in our life abroad. There are people who simply have a hard time in keeping in touch with you, and it can seem like you're sort of out of sight, out of mind. Again, with others, the conversation merely revolves around a few past shared events and experiences, a few common friends. I'm sure you've had those friendships too, and most probably there came a point where you mutually lost interest in each other. The longer that we're away and the less encounters we have with people back home, the harder it becomes to remain close and up to date, for sure. But what we as expats really want is for our people back home to take an interest in our lives and our lives abroad. Inquire about our day-to-day life and our challenges. Ask about our host culture and country. Take an interest in our new work. Memorize the names of the people we now call friends. We love knowing what's going on back home, but the truth is that our lives have changed, but we still want you to be a part of it. Valerie, an expat in Spain, says, I'd like people back home to consider the time difference and my work hours. I get calls and messages at times I'm asleep or working, and I'd love for my friends to not just think about what's a good time for them, but also what's a good time for me. And Maria, an expat in Mexico, says, I wish my friends back home had more empathy for what I'm experiencing. There's so much happening in my life abroad, so many new experiences, impressions, and people. With my expat friends here in Mexico, I'm used to sharing everything. And when I go back home and see my childhood friends, I feel like I'd need hours to catch up with them. But then often, I feel like they're not even making an effort to find out more about my life. It makes me feel separated from them. We all know that. Number 5, what we'd like folks back home to know is that please, when we come home to visit, lock in time with us ASAP. I am particularly sensitive about that one. Anna, an expat in Australia, says, don't wait for me to make the first step. Organizing catch-ups with multiple people can be stressful and high pressure, and I want to know people are excited about finally seeing me again, rather than having to chase after them to meet me. I think especially being told off because of trivial things that could perfectly be postponed can feel very disappointing to us expats, and I've definitely been there too. You know, living abroad often means becoming quite nostalgic about home. It can also make us feel like we don't really belong neither here nor there. So when we feel like meeting us is not top of your list, it can make us feel even more uprooted, and it hurts. Leticia, an expat in Chile, says, When we go home for a holiday, we have 2 short weeks to see a million people and do a million things. I wish my friends took more of an initiative and made more of an effort to see us. Granted, they don't get to see me for the rest of the year. My friends back home are so important to me, but I'm often disappointed when I feel like they don't make our meetings a priority. And here I want to add, we also love it when you make it easy for us. Like I said before, we already have to do so many things and see so many people in a limited amount of time. Please don't make us drive to the other side of town to see you. Can you just this one time or these few times make the effort and come to where we're staying or some kind of central meeting point? Because that, let's say, hour that we save in going back and forth is worth so much to us. And we can use that to do something else or meet someone else that we'd otherwise not have time to. The sixth thing we'd like folks back home to know is that the question, when are you coming home, makes us feel uncomfortable. I know this is a huge trigger for many people. First of all, because home can be a difficult thing to define, especially for adult TCKs, for serial expats who've been away from home for a long time, sometimes even longer than they actually lived back home. But also for multicultural couples and families where there are 2 or even more home countries involved. So it's not an easy question to answer for many. It also implies that you view our international lifestyle as a temporary thing, a phase, something we should eventually grow out of. There seems to be a lack of sincere interest and recognition of what we're doing, why and how we chose to do so. In many cases, the truth is that we simply do not know when or whether we'll come back home. And don't think this doesn't bother us and worry us sometimes. But because it does, please don't make us go there unnecessarily. It only adds more pressure on us or makes us feel like we need to justify ourselves. Rather, we'd love for you to meet us where we're at. Take an interest and be part of our international lives because we want you to be a part of it. Number 7 is don't make assumptions about our life abroad. Ask and listen. So depending on the country, people back home will probably have an opinion about it. And it can be a good one or a bad one, anything in between. Or often it's just stereotypes of what this country and what its people are like. The truth is, though, and every expat knows that there is no straightforward and simple way to describe and to capture any country and culture. There are just so many different facets and nuances, so many things that only make sense when you see them through local eyes and from a local viewpoint. And not because you may have read a newspaper article about our host country, not because you saw something on TV. So instead of making assumptions and jumping to conclusions about what life in that country is like, why not ask us? And then listen with curiosity and with an open mind to how we perceive living there. Jumping to conclusions really kills a conversation, and you can't possibly think that you know better than us, the people who actually live there, right? Flor, an expat in Germany, says, coming from a country where the economy is a disaster and people make $2 per day as minimum wage, relatives and friends often believe that life in a first world country is about making tons of money, easy and quick. Requests for help are always on the table, and there is an implied responsibility for the ones living abroad to economically help our relatives back home. Right. This can put expats in a really tough spot where they're potentially damned if they do and damned if they don't, right? Also, Nina, an expat in Egypt, says, I'd like people back home to know that international schools and homeschooling is not worse than the school system back home. People tend to think that that's the golden standard, but there are other ways of educating. Yes, there are. All right, and then the last point that we'd like people back home to know is to embrace our change. Any big life event will leave a mark on a person, and it can change you, at least in some ways. When you get into a relationship, you change. When you have children, you change. When you move abroad, you change. As expats, I think it's not like we change the essence of who we are, but we do need to open up and adapt to new ways of life, new ways of being and doing. There will be some things that we encounter and pick up on our international journeys that we just fall in love with and we want to integrate into our lives. But then there are also other things where we're more forced to change in order to get by and in order to be able to thrive in this different country. I know that change can be scary, both for the people living it and for the people watching it, like the people back home. So you may see us take a job in a different line of work. You may see us starting our own businesses. You may see us write a blog or take a class in something that maybe you didn't even know we had an interest in. You may see us not work and take care of the house and the children. You may wonder about what to make of this, but you have no right to judge us. You have no reason to be scared or triggered by our change. We don't need your approval, but we do need your respect for everything we do, for the ways we stepped out of our comfort zone, for the ways we needed to be resourceful and creative and resilient. Our change is a sign of strength, and we need you to embrace our change just as we've learned to do it day after day. Martina, a German expat in the US, says, "What I would like people to know is that because we live abroad, we look at our own country with new eyes. We often have a new appreciation for it and don't take certain things for granted anymore. But at the same time, we also question things that we may not have questioned before. We are more critical and point out some flaws. People don't always want to hear that, but they should understand that it doesn't come from a bad place nor a feeling of superiority. It's simply the fact that once you experience and see these differences, you can't unsee them and have to point them out, the good and the bad." All right, so before we move on to a few recordings that I've received from some brave ladies who you're going to listen to in a second, I want to, first of all, thank everyone who's contributed to this. We are all a community and we're all in this together. I really enjoyed creating this episode and I'll possibly do this again. So stay tuned because I'll want to know what your take on it is. And for now, please head over to social media. You can find me at coach.camillaquintana on Instagram and Facebook. You can email me at info@camillaquintana.com and let me know what you would like folks back home to know. What are we missing in this list, or what resonated the most with you? I'd love to know. All right, and now let's hear from some other ladies. Thank you all, and I'll be back with you next week.
Hi, I'm Claudia, one half of the Sincerely Spain blog. I am originally from a small town in Wisconsin, and I currently call Helsinki, Finland home. If there was one thing I would want folks back home to know, it would be that even though you're probably seeing our highlight reels, most of us while living abroad face daily difficulties with the simple things that you probably never think about. Whether this is due to a language barrier or just bureaucratical differences, really small things that you would never expect to have difficulties with, such as bank accounts, phone numbers, figuring out how to go to the doctor, but also shopping at a supermarket. Things like this can feel really complicated even when people in the country where you're living speak English, such as my case now in Finland, or you speak the native language, like when I lived in Spain. And while these things don't necessarily take away from the overall positive experience of living abroad, they are little things that can feel really tiring and frustrating over time. So my recommendation would be just be patient, with your loved one or friend abroad, and know that you're probably not getting the whole picture all the time.
Hi, my name is Edith. I'm originally from Hungary, currently living in the United States. Most people back home think that America is this magical, unrelatable place where dreams come true and everything is perfect, but that's just not true. We still have to work hard, pay our bills, and just in general, people are living their normal lives here. To answer your question, Camilla, I one of those who we left at home, and I'd like to speak on behalf of every expat, not just me. I'd like if those at home would understand that us living in a different country doesn't necessarily means that we are now automatically representing this new culture. Sure, it shapes our life and beliefs, but deep down, we're still that person who left home X years ago.
Hi, my name is Mariela and I'm an expat in Spain. I'm from El Salvador, and I would like that people know that when you are an expat and you meet local people, you give to them a special place in your life because you don't have the same social circle that you used to in your country. To the people back home, it might look like making good friends abroad is easy, but it's really not, which is why we hang on so much to these few local friends we make.
Hey Camilla, so I'm originally from Austria but have relocated to Australia, and I think the one thing that I would tell my friends from home is that no matter how often I go to the beach or how great the weather is here most of the time, I'm not on a holiday. I think to a lot of my friends from home, it seems tempting to just think of me living my best life on holiday, but I'm not. I am living a life. I have a job, I have problems, day-to-day stuff. It's the same. And just because the weather is better here doesn't mean that my life shouldn't be taken as seriously as someone else's. So if I were to tell my friends one thing, then it would be that.
Hello, I'm Danny, one of the co-founders of the Sincerely Spain blog. Originally from the Chicagoland area in the US, I currently call Granada, Spain my home. And if there was something that I would want the folks back home to know, it would be exactly about that, this concept of home and how it can mean so many different things to me now. I talk about missing home when I'm thinking of Chicago and my family and friends there, but I'm also saying that I'm so excited to be home when I get back to Granada after a long time away. And so I think the reality of living abroad is that it can simultaneously be both things, and that I can be really happy and really grateful for the life I have in Spain while at the same time missing everything I left behind. And I certainly think about my family and friends and miss them like crazy all of the time, much more than I let on. But I think when we're living abroad, we try and put on the happy face, the highlights reel, as they say, and just talk about how amazing it is to be abroad, which many times it is. But I would want people back home to know that I certainly remember them. I certainly think about them all the time. And that's always close to my heart, just as Spain is.
Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to share this episode with your expat besties and show me some love in the reviews. Want more juicy content designed for expat wives? Then head over to my website, www.camillaquintana.com, or follow me on Instagram and Facebook at coach.camillaquintana.